everyone. Design isn't just about how a space looks. It's about how it makes us feel, think, and function. Every environment we step into shapes our emotion, focus, and even memory. In this Mindscape series, we explore how design goes beyond decoration to improve our lives. I'm Professor Nadim Adi from Interior Design at Texas State University, and throughout this series, we'll speak with designers, artists, psychologists, and researchers to better understand how the spaces around us shape our mental well-being. Spaces speak to us in ways we may not always realize. The way a room is arranged, the materials we touch, and even the sounds we hear influence how we think and feel. The psychology of spaces is the invisible force field that shapes our experiences. In this episode, we'll uncover the hidden messages that spaces send to our minds. Our first guest is Dr. Mais El-Junaidi, Assistant Professor of Instruction in the Department of Psychology at Texas State University, who brings her considerable experience to this discussion. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you.
When we think of psychology and design, we don't always picture a team working together. How do you think a space influences our psychological state on a subconscious level, of course?
Any element in the interior design, like colors, temperature, furniture, every element, the light, all of these, the artworks on the walls, on the tables, all of these can trigger certain memories.
Okay.
And these memories will make us feel in a certain way. The happy and the bad memories, they are going to make us feel in a certain way, have certain emotions, and this is going also to manipulate our behavior in the space.
And that works regardless if we're aware of it or not, right? It's not kind of like a space is showing a stop sign or something.
We have a general understanding of how interior design can affect the psychology of a person. For example, if we talk about colors, orange, for example, promotes excitement, so it's used widely in schools. You have yellow and green, those are cheerful colors. They are used widely in restaurants and coffee shops. You have purple, for example, that promotes calmness, so it's used in bedrooms to make the person feel calm. Blue as well, blue promotes confidence. It's used a lot in business places. So colors, for examples, including the tone of the colors as well, can affect the psychology of the person and how they feel.
Yeah, so technically, there's a huge difference between bright red and burgundy, for instance, correct? As you're mentioning colors, I love that. And do we have the same effects when it comes, for instance, to lighting or to texture, for instance?
Now, texture in general, certain texture can promote comfort. If you have a very comfy like chair you're sitting on, this will make you feel better. You want to spend longer time on it. Sometimes if the chair is not comfy, you feel like you want to leave. They use this strategy sometimes in a restaurant when they don't want someone to spend a long time. They like put, for example, chairs that not that comfy, so people can spend no longer than half an hour or something. Coffee shops are the opposites. If they want you to sit and read your newspaper, spend longer time, they provide more comfy chairs for their customers.
So there is kind of like a retail aspect, like I want you to buy more, so sit here longer.
It's used actually, yes, in the market places. For the light, dim lights, for example, are meant to make you feel more calm. They use it sometimes in fancy restaurants to promote also socializing when you're sitting with these types of lights. Sometimes strong lights are meant to encourage you to work harder, so they are used a lot in workplaces. So this is how
we're getting all of the encouragement here, right? And I'm guessing to a certain level, right? Because one of the tropes, for instance, in horror movies, is that we see a dimly lit alleyway with flickering
Yes,
lights.
exactly. If you add some aspects to it, if it is like a red light or something like this, it will feel like it's a scary environment. And
Gotcha. So kind of Nightmare on Elm Street
Exactly.
situation. We're visual creatures, and we rely a lot on our sense of sight. But could space really influence us when it comes to other senses, like our hearing, for instance?
Loud noises can be distracting. For example, temperature of the space or the room, if it is very high or very low, it can affect also the feelings of the person, how comfortable they are. It can impact their mood as well. If it is very hot, they might start to feel angry or something. So all these elements, of course, can have an impact on people.
And that
psychology.
And that differs from individual to individual, correct?
Some people are like tolerate things more than others, but there are always like certain limits applies to everyone. If it is really hot, then everyone will not like it. If it is exceeding a certain...
If it's 90 degrees in the studio, it won't be a pleasant interview, right? What would you say are some common kind of mistakes that we fall into when we're designing spaces?
I'm going to give you multiple examples here. For example, if there is a very long and narrow corridor with sharp edges, studies showed that this can trigger symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Enclosed spaces, tight areas can trigger symptoms in people suffer from claustrophobia.
Fair enough.
Stairs, if there are stairs and a lot of stairs and with no alternative option, this can feel challenging, and this will appear a lot in people who have depression, for example. Sudden loud sound, if the building is located near a very busy road, for example, sudden loud sound can trigger unpleasant feelings in those who suffer from autism.
I never thought of, I always think of the space where I'm kind of looking at the space, but you bring a good point that a space doesn't exist in a vacuum. We always have to take into account
surrounded by many things, yes.
All right, and as you mentioned with the surroundings, these principles don't. We have to be kind of aware of where they are in the world as well, correct? Or
the thing is, we still up until now we don't have a code for interior design for mental disorders, to support mental disorders. There are a lot of studies when it comes to autism and dementia and how to design for these two. But when it comes to post-traumatic stress, depression, phobia, schizophrenia, eating disorders, we don't have an interior design code for these.
It's fascinating that you bring that up, because we do have a code, for instance, for physical differences, but when it comes to mental health, it's kind of depends on the experience, I suppose. So trial and error, which is not usually the best approach.
There are actually some good examples when it comes to design and mental disorders. For example, when this is a study showed that if we have natural light in a room, this will improve the symptoms of depression. And reduces the period of hospitalization. If we have a yoga room or a room for socializing in a healthcare facility, this will improve the symptoms of schizophrenia. There are many things, like for dementia, for example, if we use signage that are clear, this can help people with dementia find their way in a hospital or healthcare facility as well. So there are many examples, nature and natural elements, green colors, plants, art that has natural elements in them. These can improve the level of, improve the stress symptoms in people who are anxious.
Oh, right. Okay. So there's a lot of things that we could kind of look at and And I suppose when it comes to mental health, there's so many different, I guess, situations that people could think of, that people deal with. So it's as varied as the individual you're designing for themselves.
Yeah.
So I suppose part of the design process is to know who you're designing for.
Yes, it's communication is the key. Always
okay.
communication is the key. Communication between interior designers and psychologists, communication with the guest. All of these are very important. Communication is the key always in design.
You don't often see a psychologist on the design panel, but I suppose this is something we're going to have to begin seeing more and more often.
Yes, there should be like a course of something to bring them together.
Oh, okay. And just kind of jumping back to one of the questions, you mentioned thermal comfort, so how hot the space, how cold the space is, and you mentioned loud noises. Very quickly, would we say the scent of a space, does that kind of play into our mental well-being?
Of course, because all these elements can impact the memories, trigger the memories. Once you trigger certain memories, you are immediately affecting the emotions or impacting the feelings of the person, their emotions and how they behave after that. And it varies a lot among people. Sometimes smelling an apple pie will remind someone with the childhood and their grandmom preparing them, and this might be a pleasant memory. Some people might smell like the apple pie and remember they were carrying apple pie and they slipped and fell down, and it won't bring. The smell triggered certain memories, and these memories triggered certain emotions and behavior. The behavior after that, the person will want to spend longer time in this space or wants to leave the space. This is why when we design, we need to communicate, because things vary among people.
So communication is key. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Mace, for these really valuable insights. In our next segment, we'll be joined by Caroline Hill, Associate Professor in the Department of Interior Design at Texas State University. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Welcome back. Our second guest is Caroline Hill, Associate Professor in the Department of Interior Design at Texas State University, who brings her considerable expertise in design to this discussion. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, when we're looking at designing a space, we often think we want the person to feel good about being there. How do you think our spaces influence emotions? Whether it's overtly or subconsciously?
Well, I think this is a really important topic in interior design. There's a work that I read as a graduate student called Home as the Mirror of Self by Claire Cooper Marcus. And in that book, she really talks about the power of the interior environment over a lot of our feelings and emotions. Safety, security, identity, how we choose to decorate our spaces. The interior environment can impact us in a lot of different ways, from mood and even the way we approach relationships, and it's pretty broad.
Yeah, I haven't thought about it that
it's it's interesting.
Yeah. I'm guessing it's also tied to the hierarchy of needs. So
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So one thing when we were growing up is that we always wanted to hang stuff on the walls, posters and such.
Yeah.
So that I think that feeds into the emotions of the space as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, the ability to personalize your sacred surroundings is really important to how we express ourselves as individuals and humans. And when I reference the relational part of that, part of what Marcus talks about in her book is the challenges of building a home with a partner and how you're navigating and co-sharing this same space that you're occupying.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot, it's a really dense topic. I love this topic, but there is a lot subconsciously that actually stems back from our childhood and how we created forts as children to make us feel secure. And people have an inherent need to define their own space and sense of space as a reflection of themselves.
Yeah, and a sort of control over
Absolutely.
your environment. So
Right.
ownership, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Oh, fantastic. And when we're looking at like breaking it down into individual sections, when we look at say texture, lighting, or layout, how do you think these shape our experiences?
Again, I think it's extremely personal, and it can vary from individual to individual. But again, going back to that idea of flexibility, you know, the level of brightness that I want in a space might be different. It is different, in fact, than my husband's, right?
Fair enough, yeah.
And so we're constantly navigating these different things that we can manipulate in our interior environment to make us feel safe, to make us feel secure, to make us feel comfortable, to help us focus, whatever the task or the goal might be.
Fair enough. All right. And would you think we always hear the subliminal messaging in advertisements and such, and I get asked that question: do you guys do this when you're designing?
Oh,
a
interesting.
space?
Yeah.
But my answer is, well, there are ways, but I'd love to hear your perspective on such a thing.
So that question. So you mean in terms of creating an environment for someone else who might join us in our own environment?
Yeah,
Okay.
something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's definitely things that we can do in an interior environment to cue people in to how we want them to use our space or appreciate our space.
Gotcha.
Right? We
yeah.
can create homes and seating arrangements that are welcoming and encourage people to come together, to be close enough to have a conversation.
Fair enough.
Right?
Yeah.
Or we can set up spaces that say, this is my private domain, you're allowed only this far in.
Got it. Okay.
Right.
And I bet this is vastly different depending on which part of the world you live in.
Oh, I
right?
bet you're right. Yes, I'm sure. Yes. Cultural norms, I'm sure, impact all of those things.
Well, I think one thing that came up is that I think it was in Norway or Finland when the whole pandemic was happening, that they said you have to be 5 feet apart or 6 feet apart, and they were complaining, do we have to stand so close?
That's funny.
Yeah.
In my house, I want you to sit right next to me because I'm going to ask you all kinds of questions.
Yeah. Cool. So when it comes to mental health, what do you think are some of the most common kind of design mistakes that people fall into?
You know, I think security in a lot of different senses is really a fundamental human need, right?
Oh, right. Yeah.
So, and I don't just mean physical security, I mean mental security as well, right?
Yeah.
So having a space where you feel secure, and that can be like, can you physically protect yourself in that space?
Right.
Do you have clear sight lines to make sure that you feel safe?
Yeah.
Do you have access to nature, which is very important for mental health?
Yeah.
Natural light, do you have access to natural light, which we know is very important to mental health,
Fair
right?
enough. Yeah.
And the balance of all of those things really come into play. We did a project for victims of trafficking a few years ago in school, and one of the things we did in that project was we elevated the beds for this particular project. Was all young women who had been trafficked, but we elevated their beds because that was the place that they felt the safest.
Oh, okay.
And so they had a sight line to the door, you know.
Yeah.
So
I never thought about that.
yeah, we hadn't either. And obviously that's an extreme example of interior
still,
design and the
yeah.
impact of mental health, but to a lesser degree, you know, always having a space where you feel safe, where you feel like you're in control, and right,
Yeah,
is
fair enough.
essential.
And I'm guessing that kind of translates when we look at restaurants. There's a reason why the seats beside the walls fill up first. right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And if you'll watch a lot of times in restaurants, I've noticed, because my husband does this, I don't know if you do this, but he will take a seat at the table where he has a sight line to the door, as though he needs to be ready to protect us, you know,
Fair
our
enough.
family.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, yeah. Well, it's once you kind of read it, it's kind of like revealing a magic trick. You start seeing it everywhere.
Yeah,
right?
I do. Yeah, I do.
Okay. And So that would be mental. That would be having a sense that I'm physically secure. So
Correct,
I've got
right.
like the wall behind me. I've got a clear sight to
Right.
the exit. You also mentioned other aspects of mental security. Can you tell us a bit more about
Yeah,
that?
so a lot of feeling mentally or emotionally safe in a space can have to do with color,
Oh,
right? Color psychology, we know in our discipline, has a big impact on people.
That's true. Yeah.
And there are some generalizations that we can make about color psychology, right?
Yeah.
That sometimes red can increase anger tendencies or you know certain behaviors. Blues and greens can be calming and soothing, right?
Fair enough. Yeah,
So,
yeah.
you know, generally I think those are safe things to assume, but I think there's a nuance to that that a really talented designer or a thoughtful designer would kind of dig a little deeper into and make sure that are these colors really making you feel safe and soothed?
Yeah, and do they work in the area you're designing in? Right?
Exactly, right. Yeah, every project type is different. You know, a home versus a workplace or a hospital are very different environments.
When it comes to hospitals, we're always seeing say the use of colors as a navigational tool,
right.
and I'm always wondering, well, the color need to be bright enough, but what effect does it have on the psychology of the person?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's that's an interesting area where I think there is a lot of evidence-based design research. Hospital design is not my area of expertise specifically, but the idea of contrast between colors so that it's readable is always important. And then I think working with a designer or a design team that really doesn't just slap on kind of a we've heard this is best solution, but looks at the research and really thinks about the nuance of those color applications is really crucial.
Yeah, and I want to circle back to the project you mentioned that you did with the students. How do you approach such a heavy topic when you're working with students? And a lot of our students are, I expect this is a tough topic for them to deal with.
It was a really emotionally challenging semester.
Yeah.
So we had people from the refuge come in and talk to the students, and the owner of the refuge was actually a victim of trafficking herself, so she shared her personal story, which was really powerful. And I think her vulnerability in that way really made the students sit up and realize that this was not just a school project. This was a real world thing, and they needed to approach it with as much sensitivity as possible. And then we worked with the architect who had been hired to do several of the other buildings out there. And so he really, he did a lot of research on the design part of that. And so we were able to kind of tap into his brain about that and really thinking through positioning, like I said, of the bed and allowing them, you know, we did things like we organized a wide variety of bedding and textile options. So again, they could go in and choose patterns and colors and textures.
To get a sense of control.
Yes, that were pleasing to them. Everybody had natural light with a window seat, so they could sit there and be as close to nature as possible without having to be out in nature where sometimes they felt vulnerable. So there were a lot of interesting design
I never
moves.
thought about it that way. But then again, it's not an everyday project.
It is not. It was a special project, to be sure.
Okay. Well, definitely food for thought here. Thank you so much, Caroline. In our next segment, we'll be joined by Crystal Marine, interior design student at Texas State University. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Our guest is Crystal Marine, an interior design student at Texas State University who brings her expertise to this discussion. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So whenever we design spaces, we often think, well, we want it to look beautiful, but at the same time, we want the person experiencing that space to feel good when they're there. So how do you think spaces influence our emotions?
I mean, I think a space is part of the bigger picture of how you're influenced emotionally, even if you don't realize it in the moment. So yeah, I just think it's a big part of design, but it's, I think the biggest aspect of a designer is to really get to know your user and their needs in that space.
That's very correct, and I think you touch on a really cool point, is that what works for someone doesn't necessarily work for another person, right? It's, and you mentioned that it's not directly, and I hope I never see like a space that's directly trying to influence a person.
Right,
like
right.
Be happy or something like that. I think that's a bit much, but I think like in a subtle way, what are the usual tools that we tend to utilize as designers?
As in like influencing the person or just helping them in their own space?
I suppose in both ways. Like we have the function of the space, and we know how to kind of, okay, I need the table at a certain height, the chair at a certain spot, and all of that. But in a more subtle way, we're trying to kind of get people to, say, in a public space, maybe get them to talk to each other, or get them to, you know, focus more on the task at hand. So how do we kind of go about doing things like that?
I mean, obviously seating is a big factor in that, where it's placed, if it's fixed or non-fixed. A lot of those play a huge factor in how you want people to use that space, personally. Yeah.
I think you bring up a nice point of not fixed. So, like I think having a sense of control over your space, that's a good thing, right?
Absolutely. So like modular furniture is really fun, you know, and useful as well in those types of environments.
Yeah, and part of it is kind of, I guess, is also figuring out, because you could move your furniture around and all that, you get a sense that, oh, I'm customizing it for myself.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that's kind of the control aspect, I suppose. When it comes to lighting, do you think where do you stand on this? Like, do you think the more light the better, or like how do you approach that? I think
I'm a huge fan of natural light and figuring how to utilize as much natural light as possible before you start using non-natural light. So windows are super important, skylights, you know, and obviously you really have to take into consideration the time of day and
fair enough.
You know, the heat and the cold, but for me that's super important. Definitely no fluorescent lighting and
right. So I guess here is a bit much.
A little bit.
A little bit. Okay.
I wouldn't live here, you know.
Yeah, fair enough. Just interviews, I suppose. Right. Okay. Fair enough. How about things like the texture? Because I guess we're very visual creatures, but we often kind of tend to overlook the other senses. Yep. So how do you think, like, to the person who's watching us who's not a designer, what do you tell them about when it comes to texture?
Again, I feel texture is one of those things where it could be useful for one person and really overwhelming for another person. I personally love texture because for me it evokes like comfiness and warmth. Whereas for some people I can understand where they see too many textures, it's clutter and overstimulating.
Gotcha.
So again, I think it's just really important for the user. And
and I'm guessing the setting is also important of what you end up picking, right?
Right. I think in more of a public setting, texture can really be used as like maybe a focal point, you know, for like wayfinding or something like that. And so I think texture can really be used in a lot of fun ways.
And I guess softer textures kind of takes us back to our childhoods where, you know, our favorite stuffed animal or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
So kind of brings out the child in us, I
Yeah.
suppose, right?
Yeah, totally.
So the other thing I wanted to touch on as well is the sound aspect of a space. So what's your thoughts on that? And
I mean, I think sounds definitely always need to be controlled in a space, especially the higher the ceilings, and you know its use again. So if we're looking at restaurants or hospitals where you really need to be quiet, you really need that. So yeah, like felt paneling, stuff like that. I think super important. But
Yeah.
again, depends on the building.
oh
and
yeah,
space.
of course, yeah. And I'm guessing movie theaters, like
Right.
not having an echo or something like that, that really helps.
Fully
And
carpeted. Yeah.
yeah. One thing that we tend to see in hospitals, I suppose, is that it's a delicate balance where we want a type of floor that's easy to clean, but we don't want it to be noisy. So,
Right.
so that kind of limits us in a sense, right, when we're
Yeah.
picking our materials.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then that even like going beyond that, it's like codes and stuff like that. Like
That's true as
lot.
well. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like hats off to the material scientists who are always coming up with new things.
absolutely.
It's our playground like my playground experience when we were little was like, okay, you get grass, you get gravel, and you know, you slip and fall on the sidewalk, you're going to feel it.
Yeah.
You know, but now it's you get this kind of flexible type of flooring in playgrounds where it's almost rubbery.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Right. I was like, oh, cool. I can possibly see myself falling at my age and not worry too much about injuries.
Right.
Yeah. All right. And I think, were there any kind of spaces or space traits that you thought, well, this is definitely something I'm going to use in my project to provide a better space or to provide a you know, a more calming space of sorts?
It's a little difficult. I mean, so I guess this doesn't really pertain to me personally, but I thought it was super unique. Over the summer, I was in Italy and went to a very old building where there was a restaurant. And it was so subtle, but they had just big felt boards just lined up again, all up top. And
Oh.
I just, you know, it was really cool because I understood why they were doing it, and it was to really lower
Yeah.
that auditory stimulation in the building, and it was just such a simple thing. And for me as a designer or you know a future designer, I love simplicity in design.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
Oh,
and-
okay, yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. I think so. Since you were a designer abroad, how did you find, like, were there any kind of distinct differences in approach to design between, like, the Italian school of thought and the North American school of thought?
I think that they really continue to stick with, you know, traditional things, and I think it works for the architecture. I appreciate that it all feels timeless.
Oh, right,
Where
yeah.
you know more here you have a lot more modern, maybe a little sterile sometimes.
Fair enough.
Where there
fair,
it's not at all.
fair enough. So, speaking of character and design, would you say that there are certain things to kind of avoid having in a space to give the character, you know, to make the space, I guess, a more active participant or give it a calming effect, I suppose?
I mean, maybe less visual technology. I mean, you could have technology, but
Yeah.
maybe not having it on display, unless that's really something that you like and does calm you as a user, but
Fair enough. Uh-huh.
for me, not personally.
Okay, okay. And so that would make it an interesting conversations about how we see design in the future, I suppose.
Yeah.
with technology becoming such a central role in all of that.
Right.
One more question, I suppose. Did you do what every design professional does when they travel? Did you end up going to all of the buildings and kind of touching the
Yes.
material? Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, that's fantastic.
Absolutely.
To those who don't know, this is a very common trait of every design professional out there. We end up walking to every building and surface and kind of touching the material
Yep.
just to get a sense of the texture, the temperature, and all of that. So I'm glad that tradition is still alive.
It is.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Crystal.
Thank you.
Thank you. In our next segment, we'll be joined by Dr. Naomi Coleman Medina, Assistant Professor of Instruction in the Department of Psychology at Texas State University. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Welcome back. Our next guest is Dr. Naomi Coleman Medina, an assistant professor of instruction in the Department of Psychology at Texas State University, who brings her considerable expertise to this discussion. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Oh, thank you. So, we kind of live within buildings, we work in buildings, we spend a lot of time there. So, how do you think the style of the space affects our emotions overall?
The style of the space.
Like in terms of like the color, I know, for instance, on my part, if you stick me inside a room has plain walls and it's painted in a dark color, I won't be happy on the long run.
I love going back to examples in terms of how. Well, let me go to the beginning. So years and years ago, when a person suffered a severe trauma, and the law enforcement officers were involved, and they would be escorted to a police department or law enforcement.
Yeah.
It was more of, the kind of lighting that anybody else would have been exposed to, no matter why they were coming into the building.
Yeah, yeah.
And now we have, in fact, San Marcos Police Department has one, which I think is pretty cool. We have a soft room.
Oh, right.
And what that means is the lighting is not so clinical, and how do you describe office lights?
Yeah, so not not this kind of lighting.
No, soft lighting, subdued, not dark colors, but more relaxing colors that are, I guess, pastel.
Yeah.
And then what's really interesting, I believe, is the texture of everything in the room.
All right.
The seating has soft textile. The textiles are soft and comfortable. And when we go to, I think we always imagine calming coming from what we're seeing, but calming can come from what we're touching.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And in fact, of all the five senses, we lose our vision at some point in time.
Oh, yeah.
We can lose our taste. We can lose our ability to smell. We can lose our hearing, but we rarely lose our sense of touch.
Oh, that's a great point you bring up. Yeah.
And this came to my attention in some research that I did with wellness and counselor wellness. And it seemed like the counselors who had items that they held and touched while in their session had more of an impact on their wellness and their psychological state than what they could see visually, like plants or smell lavender or water features, which are considered,
So this might be completely, I might be completely off the mark, but is there a connection between us craving having something soft to touch, for instance, with the childhood of many kids kind of growing up with a pet or their favorite teddy bear or something like that?
So we're going back to psychology, and I'm thinking of the study with the rhesus monkeys, Harlow study, in the study of attachment, which I know we're
Yeah.
talking, decorating, but now I'm going here, but it's
still
going to
it-
make sense.
It's connected,
so
right?
infant monkeys removed from their mother. Are you familiar with that, Nadine?
I've heard about it, but I'll let you go about.
Well, it's like it's really quintessential in terms of human attachment and bonding.
Yeah.
And it has to do with touch. So when the infant monkeys or the baby monkeys were startled, they'd rush there were two types of mothers. They were both wire, but one was just wire with a bottle that the monkey could nurse from. The other mother
Yeah.
was a cloth mother with absolutely no food. I mean, no
Oh,
food
right.
resource.
Yeah.
But when the monkey was startled, afraid, or wanted touch, it went. I can't say what it wanted. I'm not the monkey, but
Yeah.
when it desired, apparently it worked. It went to the cloth mother for all of the human,
Gotcha. Yeah.
which includes touch.
Yeah. Because it's like one of the reasons I ask is like the baby for the first few years of its life or their life, they're always being held and touched and
Yes.
hugged and all of that. So I'm
Yes.
guessing that
Held.
leaves a strong imprint on us as, as a species.
It absolutely has to.
Yeah.
And that imprint is just that. It doesn't leave. So, in terms of calming or going back to the office, the space.
Yeah.
Having aspects that are, and I'll say aspects of nature.
Yeah.
But something that is natural that can be touched and not only seen, but and in fact, going to the construction of parks and or the construction of, let's say, resorts
Yeah.
are now appealing to all five senses.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So
yeah.
there's foliage that smells good. There's touch.
Yeah.
There's enough animal and wildlife to hear.
All right. And one other thing I wanted to touch upon real quick is since we're saying something that can be touched, I'm guessing also the temperature of the space plays a role. So if it's too cold or too warm, that will mess up with the person a little bit, right?
I would think so. I can't speak to that because I haven't done a lot of study in temperature. But I would imagine that if the temperature isn't, and going back to temperature and
Yeah.
going back to, let's say, nature,
Yeah.
that nature can really be harsh.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, there summer of 3 months of
Yeah.
100 degrees,
Yeah.
which made us all very miserable.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Any kind of spaces that you kind of came across that you thought, well, these are really great for getting a person to stay calm or focused or comfortable? I guess you already mentioned the strategies you use in your own office. Yeah.
Yes. I'm going to default with being outdoors.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Now we can bring the outdoors in.
Yeah.
That's not difficult to an extent.
Yeah.
So I think that any space that we use on a regular basis, really we would benefit. And there's just study after study after study that establishes that even the presence of a plant
is helpful, right?
lowers depression.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
There are studies that, again, I can't even count them all, what I've gone through. One thing, driving. There's now an awareness of what kind of landscaping are motorists seeing, and is there a type of landscape that could lower their stress level, which would
wow.
lower the possibility for road rage.
All right. Yeah.
And they've done the studies on motorists who are going with landscaping that is green,
Yeah.
actually as lower anxiety.
All right. Okay. So that's, well, at least the highways in our area are kind of trying to do that.
Yeah, so
So
going back
that's
to
good.
my example
Yeah,
of a
yeah.
place or a specific space, green.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Anything, and it doesn't have, there's a prison study.
Mm-hmm.
Prisoners exposed to an outdoor view through a window or even through visual art that had nature scenes
Yeah.
reported being more calm, less anxious, and less
right.
agitated.
All right. Oh, that's.
And this is in a prison.
And that a prison is what we would classify as a really stressful
Exactly,
environment, right?
exactly.
Wow, that's fascinating. Okay, on the flip side of all of this, would there be certain things that you tell a person, do not do this if you want to have a comfortable space?
Do not do this if you want to have a comfortable space. I'm going to go with we're all so different,
Yeah.
and what we're drawn to is going to vary. You know,
Yeah. Oh, no,
obviously,
fair enough.
because we all
Yeah,
have in study. I know some people love to study playing music.
Yeah.
Some can't deal with that, can't have that kind of stress. But what I feel is to have a space that is not chaotic,
Gotcha. Yeah.
where there is some order. Because if our space has some order, and I'm not talking everything very neatly placed, and I mean that's
Yeah.
impossible.
Oh yeah. No. Fair
But to
enough,
have a
yeah.
sense of order,
I think that's a great thing because that's something. One of those aspects of a space is that it has to make sense. So, an Alice in Wonderland kind of situation
Yes.
where furniture is on the ceiling and all of that. That really messes up with the mind.
right?
But,
And
yeah.
I will say, to me, based on what I've read and personally experienced in my own workplaces
Yeah.
that I've had throughout my life, not having any access to something natural would be, to me, probably the worst of a study area.
Gotcha.
Not
Okay.
having anything. Now, of course, we go to the library, and we can't bring our own potted plants, obviously, into a study
Fair
room.
enough. Yeah.
But to keep aware of that in
Yeah.
terms if we have some control over where we study or over where we are working,
All
to have
right.
some aspect of the natural world in it.
Oh, that's fantastic. Okay. Well, I love these insights, and thank you so
I
much.
enjoy
for
talking about them,
Appreciate
obviously.
it. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
In our next segment, we'll be joined by Denise McAllister, Assistant Professor in the Department of Interior Design at Texas State University. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Our next guest is Denise McAllister, an assistant professor in the Department of Interior Design at Texas State University, who brings her expertise to this discussion. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, we often hear about emotional space, and how do you view it as a designer? How can we get people to experience different emotions as they go through space, or maybe just influence their state of being, I guess?
You mean like happiness, contentment?
I guess so, because we hear it in whenever the marketing crowd studies these things. They'll say, well, if you're making a bakery, maybe just pump out the smell of freshly baked bread, so that people smell that and they're like, ooh, I want to buy a loaf of bread, something like that.
Okay,
But
sure.
in terms of us as designers, how do we kind of, because we deal with this, I think, in every project, but how do you think these spaces influences us emotionally?
You bring up a good point, and I think we alluded to it earlier. I always teach my students, and I've always practiced, we're not just, people think interior design is a visual thing. Does it look good? Do the colors match? But it's not. It's an aesthetic where we approach all the senses. Like you mentioned, a bakery. You know, we want the place to influence or to impress our vision as well as our hearing. It needs to have an acoustical quality to it. The smells in a space. the feels, the tactile.
Yeah.
And then what's the fifth sense?
The hearing, I guess.
Hearing, I said acoustics. Visual.
Yeah.
Oh, taste.
Taste.
That's, that's a hard one.
Yeah, I always kind of think of Willy Wonka and like when people are licking the walls to get the meals
there
and
you
all.
go.
But I don't think that's well, I've hardly ever seen any space where it's kind of tasteable.
No, but the sense of taste and the sense of smell are related. So
That's correct.
if you have
That's
a
true,
positive smell, and
Yeah.
even that, I used to work in a building that had a Subway, and I thought it was so wonderful when they would bake the bread in the morning. And I
That's
had a
true.
student who was gluten intolerant, and that really bothered her. She's like,
Oh,
I don't
right.
like that smell; it makes me sick. It's like, oh,
Oh,
great.
no.
So how in the world can we,
Yeah.
design to
Yeah.
everyone's needs? But
That's
that's our
true.
challenge. That's what we
Yeah.
do.
And I think you bring up a very nice point is that every person is different. Like we all fit the category of basic human needs, but then our personalities are so different that in design we kind of have to account for this as well, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I guess how do we kind of approach this in terms of, well, if we've got 10 different users, how do we kind of make the space work for 10 different people?
I think if you look at a bell curve, I think the majority of people, and I think the tendency in architecture and interior design has been
Yeah.
to kind of design to the middle.
Oh, right.
But
yeah.
we're stretching ourselves to support the needs of people at both ends as well. That
Gotcha.
I think of the A students and the D students, but
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah.
I think and that's where flexibility. I mean, and you have to understand what flexibility means. And you said, would a person who didn't want to hire a professional? Oftentimes, it's not they don't want to spend the money, but because they don't want to be taken over. They don't want someone to force their ideas on them.
That is true. I think.
But we don't do that, right? We don't do that. That's such a misconception.
And we I think I've heard it that in the 60s and 70s, designers and architects tended to do, well, this is the design and this is how it's gonna work, and they kind of didn't take into account, I guess, the nuances of the place where the design is going to be built in. So hence why we end up with beautiful buildings that maybe work for a few months and then people just abandon it in a sense.
Right. Well, you're talking from an architectural perspective.
Yeah.
We could get into a feud about interior design versus architecture and respect for the clients and respect for the.
Don't I know it? Yeah.
But yeah, there's definitely. I'm not sure. I mean, I've been practicing for a while, a long time, and we always respected the needs, but also the what the space deserves, what the space. I was quoted as a student years ago said, I remember you telling us, it's not about you, it's about what the space deserves. And I'm like, I didn't really say that.
Yeah.
You did. And I'm like, okay,
but
well.
That's a nice quote though.
I guess it's been remembered for decades.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like you don't, you have to respect the culture that you're designing in.
Yeah.
The needs of your clients, the building that you're in,
And I think it's interesting you bring in culture because, and I mean, we know that especially in terms of color, but you also brought the point of, well, even in terms of smell, there will be certain cultures or say where certain smells are frowned upon, I suppose, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and that's where the building systems come in, and your heating and ventilation. If you're supporting a client that has really sensitivity issues, then you need to be sure that those smells are vented properly.
That is true, yeah.
And we can't assume that everybody likes what we like, and everybody.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
So.
So we kind of touched upon smell, and we touched upon the visual aspect of it. In terms of the acoustic aspect of it or the sound aspect of it, how do you think sound kind of influences our behavior when it comes to design?
I think it's really interesting. It's interesting you brought that up.
Yeah.
In the classroom, a lot of our students, we do studio-based learning. So our students are creating. A lot of them are now in their own little environments. They've got the headphones on. And
true,
that's
yeah.
very different from where I could, even if I talk, I have to say, excuse me, can everybody
yeah.
take your headphones off for a minute so we can talk?
Yeah.
It used to be we were all part of a big environment. We were all together listening to the same music.
Yeah.
And we would have conflicts about that, which radio station, which music.
That is true. Yeah.
But now there's that big difference. But that's also good. You could provide that solitude that some clients need, some users need, by
Yeah.
providing those kind of acoustic support, not just headphones, but one client needs to be connected, one client needs to be isolated.
That is
And
true.
so the
yeah,
acoustics are how you would really.
Yeah, and I think like I think a point you brought up is the availability and accessibility of technology. So
Yeah.
so that's very interesting, because as you mentioned, when we were going to school, you had this like big radio or stereo or something, and you brought in and I think I'm going to date myself, but like the cassette tapes.
Yeah.
Pop those in and hope that everyone's going to like your particular taste in music, right?
So
Yeah.
technology is really cool. I'm and I do a lot with aging in place, as you know,
Yeah.
and smart home technology.
Yeah.
But it's really beneficial. It's really changing the way we work, live,
Fair enough. Yeah.
study,
Yeah.
entertainment. But it's really positive. But it's difficult for people to adapt it.
That is true. Yeah. And I think well, I'm seeing it on my end more and more is how do I kind of if there's a new gadget, I'm kind of like, well, do I really need this new gadget? Because I don't really want to go through the curve of learning the whole thing and going through that process, because sometimes it's getting more difficult to me, and I find myself sometimes calling on my kids or my students, kind of tell like, how do you operate this?
Yeah. But it's worth it to learn, I think.
I think, yeah, no, definitely.
I mean, not that
yeah.
everything about technology is positive. I mean, there are
Fair
some
enough,
things that
yeah.
are perhaps negative.
Yeah. Have you come across any kind of examples of well-designed spaces that you think, well, here's a space that I really want to point my students to, or here's a space that I want to point my students to tell them, this is not how you do it? So.
Again, I think it lends itself toward what an individual user is looking for and needs.
Yeah.
Imagine a school library, university library. Some people are looking for the study carrels. I don't know if they still have study carrels, do they?
Oh, yeah.
But some people want to sit out where they can see everybody.
Yeah.
Want to sit where they can see people coming into the space. Other people don't want to be seen, so it's just making a flexible space, knowing the needs of the various users, but providing for them too.
Got it, yeah. And let's kind of maybe switch gears a bit. What are kind of like some common pitfalls when it comes to saying, well, there are things that, here are some kind of design elements that might not be the best to do if you're aiming to have better mental health in a space?
Again, acoustics, it's loud, abrasive noises,
All right, yeah.
hard surfaces. It's very difficult to feel comfortable when you've got shiny floors and hard walls and
Fair enough, yeah. All right.
metal
yeah.
blinds on the windows. We're looking for soft things and.
So I guess what works in a concert does not work in a
Well,
workspace.
No,
or
actually, it would. A concert, you would need that acoustic. You theater people would know, but like sound absorption.
Oh,
And you need that
yeah.
also in a classroom. You need that in a living room.
That's
You
true,
need that
that's
in
true.
maybe even the kitchen.
All right. Oh, awesome.
So,
Well,
yeah.
Well, thank you so much. These are a lot of like cool things to think about. So I really appreciate giving us all of these insights. Yeah. Our spaces speak to us in subtle ways, shaping how we feel, behave, and relate to others. When we design with that in mind, we create environments that heal, inspire, and empower. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Mindscapes. We'll see you again soon.